Good morning. My name is Tanaka Mapanga, and I'll be presenting on the noticeable effects of the Reserve Bank cutting interest rates to record low of 0.1% on the 3rd of November during the COVID-19 recession period. This presentation is intended to keep you, my fellow members, up to date on the consequences, both negative and positive, of interest rate cuts on our economy. The first positive noticeable effect was increase in consumer spending. Consumer spending is the total money spent on final goods and services by individuals and households. Consumer spending was at negative 0.9% in November 2020, but when interest rates were cut, it increased to 10.9%, demonstrating how successful the interest rate cut was. When you cut interest rates, you make it easier for consumers and businesses to borrow money. Because when interest rates are cut, the money that you pay back is more or less the money that you would have borrowed at a very low increase, which shows that when consumers have more money, they tend to spend more. The second positive noticeable effect of interest rate cuts was unemployment level. In November 2020, unemployment stood at 6.8%, but at the end of July 2022, it had dropped by 50%, which was a very significant change. Unemployment is affected by interest rates in this way. When you cut interest rates, you make it easier for consumers and businesses to borrow more money because the interest rates will be lower. When they borrow more money, they tend to invest. When they invest, this increases demand for goods. And when demand increases, it should be matched up by an increase in supply. And to increase supply, you need more people to be working so that you can increase your output. The third noticeable change was economic growth. Economic growth, as demonstrated by our graph, GDP has been increasing since 2020, since the introduction of the cutting of interest rates. It has shifted from a negative value to a positive value. In July, GDP stood at a negative 0.6, which means our economy was contracting. But as we cut down the interest rates, you'll find that our economy started expanding, which is clear indication that cutting down interest rates has a positive effect on the economic growth because the demand for goods will increase, which will cause an increase in our GDP, which therefore increases our economic growth. Now we move on to the negative effects suffered as a result of cutting down interest rates. The first one is inflation. Inflation is an increase in the general prices of goods. Since the introduction of low cut interest rates, inflation has climbed to 6.1%, which is the highest the economy has ever seen since 2001. And this is assumed to be a result of the country's reduction in interest rates. Prices will increase as demand increases. Because interest rates were cut, availability of money was increased. As it was increased, people could afford to buy more goods than they usually bought, which caused the increase in prices. The effect of low interest rates on the exchange rates. Exchange rates tend to fall when interest rates fall. This is because as interest rates fall, it means that the return on investment tends to be also low. So this pushes away foreign investors from investing in the economy because the rate at which their investments yield benefits is relatively low. So this pushes them away to countries which offer higher return on investments. There are also other negative effects of low interest rates. The first one being liquidity trap. This is a situation in which consumers decide not to spend their money as a result when interest rates are cut. This is because they assume that the government is panicking and trying to go into a situation where they are forced to spend their money, and they decide not to spend the money but keep it not in banks but at their personal savings as cash and keeping it as cash. There is also the risk of high asset prices. If there is a increased demand for property, for example, if the demand for property increases, the effect is that the price of the properties is also going to increase, which is a negative effect for the economy because most people won't be able to afford buying properties. Then banks' profitability is reduced. This is because banks mainly make their interest based on interest rates that they charge people. So if interest rates are low, their profitability is also low. Some banks may even close as a result of low interest rates. Then we move on to the conclusion. It can therefore be stated that the decline in the exchange rate has resulted in both good and negative impacts that are seen even at the most basic level, which is that of the consumer. It is important to use monetary policy instruments to stimulate economic development, but a watchful eye should be kept to ensure that negative impacts do not increase to hazardous levels. As noted in our previous slide, we noticed that some of the effects are not really felt by the economy of Australia because the responsible government acted in a way before that made these effects not to reach that level. So we should ensure that whenever we decide to use some of these instruments, we use them in a very cautious manner to avoid effects that affect the economy in a way that does not benefit anyone. Thank you.